Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. This is video number 14 in response to the book Problems with Preterism by Brian Hodge. And it's been a couple of weeks since I was with you. Took some time off for the holidays. Really enjoyed my time. And I just got to tell you, it's really cool to be in a nice, snug, warm office here. We've had 2 straight days of snow on Facebook. I posted some pictures yesterday of the snow in my yard, out my front door, so to speak. And here in southern Oklahoma, here specifically in Ardmore, we're normally shielded from bad weather. Anything that comes directly from the south, anything that comes directly from the north, we're shielded from it. The Red River shields us from the south, what they call the Arbuckle Mountains. And for those of you who actually live where mountains are, that's really a silly term. But anyway, what they call the Arbuckle Mountains shields us from that coming from the north. But if it comes from the east or southeast, or from the west or southwest, then we get pounded. Well, guess what? This came directly from the southeast, as I remember it. And I mean to tell you, as of this morning, now when I say we got pounded, that means we got 6 or 7 inches. And I know that some of you folks live in areas which 6 or 7 inches a foot is hardly even worth mentioning. But at 6 or 7 inches, our town of Ardmore, Oklahoma shuts down. The schools are dismissed. Everything stops. And I kind of like it that way. Not that they shut down, but the fact that we very rarely get that kind of weather. I am not a cold weather person. Absolutely despise it. Anything below 50 degrees, too cold for Preston. So anyway, now I'm using a different microphone this morning. I have been using my little blue ball. So I want to have some feedback from you. I'm not using my ball this morning. I want you, my viewers, to let me know if today's audio is better than it's been over the last couple of months. All right? Is it clearer? Is there less feedback, or is there less echo, if you want to use that term? So please let me know about the quality of the audio. Okay, so what we want to do today, number one, just a little bit of rehearsal, because again, it's been a couple of weeks since we had a video on Mr. Hodge's book. Mr. Hodge goes to Luke chapter 17 and makes a huge issue about the terminology of the days of the Son of Man versus the day. And he says, well, the days of the Son of Man, that can refer to the fall of Jerusalem. But the day of the Son of Man must refer to the end of time. There must be, according to Mr. Hodge in his paradigm, there must be that so far 2,000-year gap between the days of the Son of Man versus the day of the Son of Man. And then, strangely enough, he turns around and says, when Jesus said, the time is coming in which you will desire to see one of the days of the Son of Man, but you will not see it. All of a sudden, he says, here Jesus is telling them they will not see his final coming. So, this is supposedly proof positive that Jesus is saying to his apostles, they will not see his second coming. But wait a minute. It says you will not see one of the days of the Son of Man, but the days of the Son of Man are supposedly the fall of Jerusalem. So according to Mr. Hodge's own hermeneutical rule of days versus day, that must mean the apostles would not live to see the fall of Jerusalem, but Jesus clearly said they would. So his argument is completely, totally self-entrapping and self-defeating. Furthermore, we have examples right here in the chapter of Luke chapter 17. We have the days of Noah, climaxing in the day of Noah, the day they entered the ark, and the rest were taken away. We have the days of Lot, consummating in the day in which Lot left and destruction came. And so there's no way that you can divorce the days of Noah and the days of Lot from the day of Noah and the day of Lot. There is no temporal gap. And so Mr. Hodge's entire premise that there is a vast difference between days of the Son of Man versus day actually impales him on his own keyboard. Okay, so then in his book, he turns his attention to the Olivet Discourse. Now, as I've already told you, I am not going to examine every single thing Mr. Hodge has to say about the Olivet Discourse because he has a lot to say about it. And the reason I'm not going to examine everything that he has to say is because I produced, a couple of hundred videos on the Olivet Discourse. But I do want to examine ever so briefly, and I'll only cover it in this video. I want to cover some of the basic presuppositions and false concepts that Mr. Hodge has. Point number one, on page 44, he says, well, preterists are wrong because Jesus in Matthew chapter 24, the parallel passages, talks about the Great Tribulation. The Great Tribulation is the fall of Jerusalem. And then he says, Mr. Hodge does, that Jesus posits the fall of Jerusalem, the coming of the Son of Man after the fall of Jerusalem. So the Great Tribulation is the fall of Jerusalem. The coming of the Son of Man is after the fall of Jerusalem. Wrong. The time of the abomination of desolation, ladies and gentlemen, is not the totality of the fall of Jerusalem. The fall of Jerusalem is the climax. It's the climax of the Great Tribulation. Because after all, the Great Tribulation will come after the setting up of the abomination of desolation. Now, Josephus gives us some ideas about the abomination of desolation, and none of them have to do with the actual destruction. Or not all of them, I should say. But secondly, here's something even more powerful, in my estimation. And that is, while it could theoretically be argued that Jesus posits his coming, and by the way, that's the coming of the Son of Man. And let me remind you of what we saw earlier. Mr. Hodge makes a huge deal about this issue of the coming of the Son of Man. And he posits that as an end of time event. Although he admits there was a microcosmic coming of the Son of Man, i.e. the fall of Jerusalem, and a macrocosmic. But the coming of the Son of Man is taken directly from Daniel chapter 7, 13, 14. It is the only Old Testament passage in the Old Testament that speaks of the coming of the Son of Man on the clouds of heaven. But here's the kicker to that. It is emphatically and specifically, unequivocally posited in the days of the Roman Empire. By the way, not the days of Antiochus Epiphanes. You see, that alone destroys Mr. Hodge. So the coming of the Son of Man, no matter what you want to make of it, whether micro or macro, you cannot separate micro from macro by inserting 2,000 years between the fall of Jerusalem and the coming of the Son of Man, because the coming of the Son of Man would occur in the Fourth Empire, i.e. Rome. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, this is absolutely inescapable. But the next point, Mr. Hodge says that there is this delineation between the Great Tribulation and the coming of the Son of Man. He puts the coming of the Son of Man at the end of time. Now, remember this, however. Mr. Hodge agrees and admits that the fall of Jerusalem was a coming of the Son of Man, but he calls that the microcosmic. That's the little bitty coming of the Son of Man. Daniel 7 knows absolutely nothing about two comings of the Son of Man in the days of the Fourth Empire. It's not there, ladies and gentlemen. That is an eisegetic argument that has literally no probative value to it whatsoever. But here's the point I want to get to. Mr. Hodge conveniently overlooks the fact that Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but especially Matthew 24, verse 29. And it says, Jesus said, immediately after the tribulation of those days, they will see the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So when would this coming of the Son of Man, quote, after the Great Tribulation, according to Mr. Hodge, it would occur immediately after the tribulation. So here's the deal. If you want to argue that the tribulation is the fall of Jerusalem, just for argument's sake, I don't believe it for a moment. It's associated with it, but it is not defined as it. Okay. But if you define the Great Tribulation as the actual fall of Jerusalem, and you posit the coming of the Son of Man after that, then according to Matthew chapter 24, verse 29, that demands that the coming of the Son of Man would occur immediately after the fall of Jerusalem. Well, guess what, folks? We're living 2,000 years after the fall of Jerusalem. That is not immediately after. Now, generally speaking, when people make this argument, they literally play word games with the word that is translated as immediately. This is the Greek word eutheos. This word is used 82 times in the New Testament. In a great number of those occurrences, it has to do with, and it's used in a context in which Jesus heals someone of an incurable disease, leprosy, or they were blind, or they were crippled all of their life, or even his apostles did that. And so what we're told, I've been burning my wood in my fireplace, and my throat just doesn't like that at all. I had to stop it 2 or 3 days ago, but I'm still suffering the results of it. Apologize for that. It's just the way it is. But I did have to stop. So anyway, here's the way that a great number of commentators try to deal with the word eutheos. They say, well, eutheos doesn't mean right then, right there, immediately. What it really means is it's the next thing on the prophetic agenda. I have challenged people in discussions of this. Show me where the lexicons prove that. More importantly, show me another context, okay? Show me another context in the New Testament in which the word eutheos speaks of one event and then says immediately after that, and it's referring to events 2,000 years later. Show that to me. It's not there. So what Mr. Hodge is doing, as some other commentators who make that argument, they're literally creating a new definition of eutheos. Now remember, eutheos is normally used in context in which Jesus heals someone and they were immediately healed. Would anyone argue? Well, what that really means is Jesus said, be clean. And 40 or 50 years later, somehow, some way, they got better. Would anyone argue that? In John chapter 6, it's not a healing situation. Jesus has walked out during the storm to the boat in which his apostles are. And he speaks to them. And of course, Peter, impetuous one as he was, says, Lord, if it's really you, bid me come to you. And Jesus says, come. This is in the parallel passages, by the way. And Peter steps out of the boat and he starts to walk out there to Jesus. But then all of a sudden he took his eyes off of Jesus and he looks at the waves and they're, ripping and roaring and what have you. And he begins to sink and he says, Lord, save me. So Jesus lifts him up and says, oh, you have little faith. But then it says, immediately the boat was at the other side of the sea. Now, the Sea of Gennesaret is approximately 6.5 miles wide. They were in the midst of it. And it says, immediately they were at the other side. Would someone want to argue, well, they got busy really, really hard, and they got to rowing really, really fast, and they got to the other side, in an hour or so. It's not the point, is it? Folks, eutheos, translated as immediately, means exactly that. So, since Mr. Hodge says the Great Tribulation was the fall of Jerusalem, then according to the proper, correct, and right definition of the word eutheos, Jesus said emphatically, unambiguously, that his coming on the clouds of heaven was going to be immediately after that destruction. And you know what? He doesn't mention, ever so conveniently, Mr. Hodge doesn't even notice, unless I missed it, doesn't even mention Matthew 24:29. Immediately after the tribulation, they will see the Son of Man coming. Now, he runs over and says, Mark states that the Son will come in the clouds in that day, in those days after the tribulation. So he omits the word immediately. And they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of power and great glory. Matthew states that it will be eutheos de meta, teen thalipsis, etc., immediately after the tribulation of those days. I had missed that. That the signs in the skies will appear. And tote, then at that time they will see the Son of Man coming. But did you notice he doesn't tell us what eutheos means? Did you notice that he tried to insert a gap between eutheos and then? Did you notice that he then runs to Luke and says, well, Luke is even more ambiguous. Luke is more ambiguous in terms of the time frame, merely stating at the end of his description of the city's destruction that there will be signs in the heavens. And then he says, tote, then the Son of Man will come. Folks, I'm sorry, you can't go to these other passages that do not use eutheos and negate the use of eutheos in Matthew 24:29. That's not the way exegesis works. That's not the way hermeneutic works. The point being, obviously, first of all, Mr. Hodge completely abuses the terminology and the concept of the Great Tribulation as the fall of Jerusalem. Secondly, he completely ignores, he uses immediately after those days, he lists it, but he doesn't talk about it. And then he tries to create a dichotomy, a temporal dichotomy between immediately and then he tries to counter the immediately, even though he doesn't discuss it. He probably realized some people are going to pay attention to it. So he tells us, Mark just simply says, in those days after. And Luke is even more ambiguous. Thus, we're supposed to reason, according to Mr. Hodge, we're supposed to reason that because Luke is ambiguous and because Mark doesn't use eutheos, that means that eutheos doesn't mean immediately after. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, that is extremely poor. That is absolutely false exegesis and hermeneutic. But that is how he justifies positing the coming of the Son of Man at the end of time. I'm only going to do maybe 2 or 3 videos even discussing Mr. Hodge's comments on the Olivet Discourse. I'm not going into detail. I'm just going to comment on a few of the fundamental fallacies. Today's fallacy is enough, in reality, to completely destroy his argument on the coming of the Son of Man in Matthew 24. Hey, thanks for joining me on today's preterist apologetics. That was Wednesday night. This has been a really, really busy week. Okay. I was on 4 separate blogs, interviews, London, one was Zach Davis, one with Mike, 2 guys and a Bible, and then in addition to all of my regular filming. And so, it's one of those cases. Well, let's see, this is Friday. Where are we at now? Okay, so forgive me for that. But anyway, thanks for joining me for Morning Musings and responding to the critics. I'll see you on Monday.